Members, we are moving to file item 54. That's AB 1251. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1251 by Assemblymember Gomez, enacting to open space lands.
Mr. Gomez.
Mr. Speaker and members, Assembly Bill 1251 aims to empower local governments that want to develop greenways along urban waterways in their jurisdictions. Greenways can directly improve the quality of life in communities by providing important recreational, flood management, water and air quality, and open space revitalization benefits to communities. AB 1251 defines a greenway as a bicycle and pedestrian, non-motorized vehicle transportation and recreational travel corridor adjacent to an urban waterway. Local governments may also include greenways in the local open space plan of their general plan. Additionally, a tax-exempt nonprofit organization can obtain a conservation easement for the specific purpose of developing greenway. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Gomez. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 53, noes 13. Measure passes. Members, we are going to move to file item 97. That's AB 801. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 801 by Assemblymember Bloom, enacting to post-secondary education.
Mr. Bloom, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. AB 801 is a measure that will assist homeless youth that are trying to earn college degrees. Homeless youth encounter many challenges pursuing a successful life. Those homeless youth who make it to high school graduation and want to attend college need more assistance than the average college student because they lack financial and often, sadly, family support. AB 801 will streamline access to assistance for homeless youth in a few different ways. The Act qualifies homeless students for some of the assistance and services currently offered to foster youth, such as priority enrollment in state universities and community colleges, and access to fee waivers. Amendments taken in Appropriations Committee address cost concerns of the CSUs and community colleges. I remind you that California has the highest number of homeless youth in the nation. It is essential that we address the needs of this population and help them to access the education that will help them assure a brighter future. AB 801 is no opposition, and I urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. Seeing no discussion or debate on this item, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 48, noes 8. Measure passes. Members, we are going to move to file item 59. That's AB 154. File item 59, AB 154. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 154 by Assemblymember Ting, enacting to taxation, declaring the urgency thereof to take effect immediately.
Mr. Ting, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 154 simplifies our tax system by conforming state law with federal tax law on 14 different acts. There hasn't been a federal conformity bill since 2010, and we think this is a great opportunity to really streamline our system for many of our taxpayers. This bill has received no votes in either committee and is supported by members of both sides of the aisle. AB 154 has no opposition, and again, the support of CalTax, the Cal Chamber, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the California Manufacturers and Technological Association, as well as Tech America. Again, this is a basic federal conformity tax bill. We haven't done one in 5 years. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Jones, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise in support of AB 154. The recent economic recession has hurt many California companies, and although some have recovered, others are still operating with NOLs, net operating losses. Federal law authorizes businesses anticipating a current year NOL an extension of time to pay their taxes from the prior year. AB 154 conforms the federal provision that allows businesses with a net operating loss an extension of time to pay their taxes. This extension allows them to offset their losses against current taxes and allows businesses to make use of their money now. According to the Franchise Tax Board, this will allow businesses to access $12 million of taxes due to them now, as opposed to waiting a couple of years for a refund. This is critical as the LAO projects a possible economic downturn in the next 3 years. AB 154 would put money into the economy so the businesses can make investments and in preparation of the tough years ahead. I sincerely ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Gallagher, you are recognized.
Mr. Speaker, members, I'm really having to think about this bill. I definitely see the benefit of conforming our tax policy to the federal tax policy. That makes things easier for business, makes things easier for our taxpayers in California as they're doing their taxes every year. One thing that's glaringly missing from this conformity is this giving the same treatment to health savings accounts that the federal tax code gives, having that same tax beneficial treatment at the state level. And right now, as I understand it, that's missing from this bill. The governor himself has said that he wants to encourage health savings accounts as a way to deal with the retiree health care crisis that we're having right now, that this could be an option. And having that same tax treatment that HSAs get at the federal level, at the state level, would help encourage health savings accounts, help people, incentivize them to save up for their health costs in the future. So I really think that this should be added into that conformity, and I would, just as a question of the author,
without objection,
ask, is that something that you would consider adding into this bill either now or in the future as it goes across into the Senate?
I'm happy to address that in my close.
Thank you, Mr. Ting. Mr. Gallagher.
So back on my time, Mr. Speaker, I think we should really think about if we're going to conform our policy, if that's really the intent, if we're going to conform our tax policy to the federal level, we should do it across the board and provide the same tax treatment for HSA accounts.
Mr. Bigelow, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to support AB 154. It eases filing for taxpayers, administration with the Franchise Tax Board. Members, California tax laws have, for the most part, been out of sync with the federal law since 2009, with the last comprehensive conformity, which it was enacted then. AB 154 will fix this confusion for working families, small businesses, and taxpayers of California. I want to thank the author for his thoughtfulness on this bill and encourage an aye vote.
All debate having ceased on the measure, Mr. Ting, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this bill where we did do 14 acts to conform with federal tax law, we did try to make it as revenue neutral or close to revenue neutral as possible. Obviously, we couldn't fit everything in. Based on that, we tried to do the best we could with conforming tax law. Obviously, there are laws, as my colleague has mentioned, that are still out there that obviously we would want to try to tackle maybe at a later date. But again, we have a bill before you that helps streamline the tax system. I think is very fair, good for our taxpayers, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Ting. With that, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 64, no 0 on the urgency. Ayes 64, no 0 on the bill. Measure passes. We're moving to Madam Speaker's items. We are moving to file item 41. That's AB 1288. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1288 by Assemblymember Atkins, enacting to greenhouse gases.
Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to present Assembly Bill 1288, which recognizes the importance of continuing California's greenhouse gas emissions reduction efforts after 2020. Specifically, 1288 clarifies the ongoing role of market-based mechanisms in helping to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. California's climate programs continue to serve as a national and international standard for tackling climate change in a manner that maintains our economic vibrancy. While we've made great strides in meeting our first set of goals, there's more work to be done. Our cap-and-trade program has proven to be effective and complementary strategy for meeting our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals and should continue to play a key role in achieving further reductions. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Daly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to rise in friendly opposition, I guess I would say. I think that the program that we had under AB 32 did not serve the ratepayers and the taxpayers of California well. If we're going to lead the nation and the world in reducing carbon, we need to have a little better policy than what we had before. We can't just set a target under percentage. We need to actually look at the areas of the state where we're overproducing electricity, where we're actually diverting it to other states at a very low rate at the cost to our taxpayers and our ratepayers. So I think in the next goal, whether it's 2030 by 50% or 2030 by 40%, whatever that goal is, we need to actually do some good policy and talk about how we're going to actually reduce carbon, not just be pigeonholed by lobbyist groups that want to use their technology. For example, we could use natural gas as a bridge for commercial trucking instead of trying to get to electric commercial trucks. So I would urge a no vote. I think we need to look at the policy and do a little better job, and so that we can lead the world and under reducing carbon.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Mr. Gallagher.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, members, I'd like to echo the comments of the gentleman from Bieber. I think we need to be really thoughtful about this process. And right now, there's not a lot of detail into what would happen if this was extended. Originally, it was promised that there would be some economic analysis of the jobs and emissions risk of leakage with the 2020 plans, but we have not done that. We haven't done that economic analysis. And I think the greater question for us to think about is, what is the cost of continuing the cap and trade program? It may be a laudable goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and reduce carbon, but there's a real cost. There has been a real cost in terms of jobs. And as many of you know and have seen, as California Manufacturing and Technology Association has pointed out, we have fallen behind the rest of the nation in manufacturing jobs created. And it is a direct result of our cap and trade program and our AB 32 policies. We need to be very thoughtful about how we move forward, because this could cost us jobs and inhibit us bringing people out of poverty. I think the bottom line is, right now we have more people living in poverty. We have more people looking for jobs, and not only that, their cost of living is becoming higher because of these policies. Their energy is going up. They're paying more at the gas pump. They're paying more for their food prices, all as a result of these policies. So we need to be very thoughtful of the cost of continuing to extend this program, and I would urge a no vote. Thank you.
Mr. Perea.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I'm happy to rise today in support of AB 1288. As many of you know, my goal over the last few years has been to ensure equitable distribution of cap and trade revenues to disadvantaged areas of California that are left oftentimes to bear the burden of many of these policies. I've been encouraged over the last 12 months to see that so many of the projects that help rural California comply in meeting the cap and trade goals are now being funded by this body, as well as the Senate and the governor's office. And so I'm pleased to see that the revenues that are being generated from rural parts of the state are being reinvested back into rural parts of California. And so that gives me great optimism that as we continue to move down this path, and that as we continue to look at extending cap and trade, that rural California will be poised to be a beneficiary in ensuring that some of our most vulnerable citizens in this state can also take part in some of the great gains that we are making in reducing greenhouse gases. So I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perea. Mr. Bloom, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this important bill, which really just clarifies the ongoing role of market-based mechanisms. Our climate programs in California are a model for not only our country, but for the world. And so I ask you to cast an aye vote on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Bloom. Ms. Eggman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise in support of AB 1288. And as compelling as my colleague from Nicholas's arguments are about job loss, we know the green job economy is the most thriving, fastest growing job economy we have in this state. Over 430,000 jobs in the green market economy. It's been our fastest growing. And as we all know, business tells us all the time, we need certainty. People need to know that California is going to continue with these goals. Climate change is not something that we check the box and say, we fixed that and we just go on. Our business community needs to know that we are committed to this. And so I strongly urge and I vote on AB 1288 so that we can continue to be world leaders and continue to grow the kind of jobs that we all want.
Thank you, Ms. Eggman. Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to 1288. 1288, very simply, will abrogate this legislative body's, that's easy for me to say, this measure, AB 1288, will abrogate forever this legislative body's ability to regulate AB 32. And it will surrender this to an unaccountable government bureaucracy. We as elected officials are held accountable by our constituents and the voters, whereas the Air Resources Board is an unchecked and completely unaccountable government agency. The current law allows for a necessary review of the effectiveness of the regulations and laws that are put in place by this government. This is the role of the legislature to have oversight. AB 1288 would remove that accountability structure and provide for free rein to create whatever regulations CARB so desires in potentially an obscure and somewhat secret manner without any accountability to the voters and the taxpayers of California, which is what this body represents. This forfeiture of the oversight authority entrusted to us by our constituents should not be cast aside. It should not be bestowed upon a government bureaucracy that is completely unaccountable to the people of California. For these reasons, I urge no vote.
All debate having ceased on the item, Madam Speaker, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was going to make several concluding comments, but I think as it relates to job creation and the model that we have become, not just in this country but in the nation, my colleague from Santa Monica, my colleague from Stockton, I think gave my closing comments in response on that. Lastly, I would just say in terms of this program, to continue and give certainty to the market and the business world is what this bill particularly does. And I would just say in response, there is probably not one program more monitored, watched, and overseen than California's cap and trade program. So I would respectfully ask for your support. There's certainly a lot of dialogue that will continue as we move forward with this piece of legislation. Sometimes it takes a while to come together. I look forward to this discussion to continue as we move into the Senate and have the discussions. If this bill is supported today, I would really urge your support to continue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With that, the clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. The clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 49, noes 24. Measure passes. Members, we are going to move to file item 57. That's AB 1335 for the purpose of amendments. Clerk will read with amendments.
Assembly Bill 1335 with amendments by Assemblymember Atkins.
Madam Speaker, you may open on the amendments.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I rise quickly to present AB 1335, the Building Homes and Jobs Act. The amendments accomplish two things, two important goals. The first states that the developed investment strategy for use of funds shall distribute 50% of the funds as direct allocations to local governments. The second amendment commits that 10% of the overall funds shall be extended to address affordable home ownership and rental housing opportunities for agricultural workers and their families. I would ask for your support in these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ms. Waldron, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We oppose the amendments.
Okay, we are going to take a roll call vote on the amendments. The clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. This is on the amendments. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll. Tally the vote. Ayes 45, noes 22. Amendments are adopted. Bill is out to print and back on file. Members, I understand we're going to be moving to file item 52. That's AB 645. File item 52, AB 645. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 645 by Assemblymember Williams and others, an act relating to electricity.
Mr. Williams, you may open.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I'm honored to present the Renewable Portfolio Standard updated for 2030. This is a prime example of California's successful work on climate change while maintaining an affordable and reliable electricity system. Despite early concerns about the availability of sufficient resources, the RPS has led to the development of new solar, wind, and geothermal power plants, as well as related manufacturing and services. These investments have created thousands of new jobs, millions of new investments and tax dollars, and significant clean air and climate benefits. Yet the positive momentum of the program will plateau in 2020, and all the scenarios for achieving long-term climate change goals rely on further increasing zero-carbon energy resources. This bill increases the RPS by 50%, to 50% by 2030 and advances the state towards a cleaner, healthier, and more prosperous future. I also want to thank my colleague, joint author, the member from Lakewood, for his unswerving support on this bill, and I'd ask for your aye vote.
Ms. Grove, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition, and I want you guys to think about something. We had a tour of an ISO plant that was taken to us by our colleague that's in the West what is it? Laughlin area, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, Miss Gaines, she can do a point of personal privilege. So anyways, we did a tour of an ISO plant. And when this ISO plant was giving us a tour, they showed the graphs on the computer screens where they were garnering and purchasing energy to be able to make sure that we didn't have a break in our energy fluctuation, to make sure the grid was supported. And we think about how all of us were raised, especially my age group. We were taught about how to, not use electricity in the daytime, but then gear up and use electricity at night, like do your laundry at night and things like that. And that makes a huge difference when they're trying to balance energy on the grid or make sure that there's no breaks in the energy fluctuation. So when you use all the solar and all the wind that they have during the daytime, it showed on these charts that there would be a huge influx at night in order to make the energy to be able to be consistent so that we didn't have blackouts or brownouts. And then there's purchasing throughout different states and on the western region. But the thing is that if we increase this without developing some type of mechanism to be able to make sure that we have consistent energy flow, I think we put these ISOs, the people who actually provide or give us or purchase electricity for all of our constituents, in a pretty big bind. They already fear that there is not going to be a way to go from the bottom baseline of providing a low level of electricity or using renewables all the way to the top when we need to power up at night when renewables are not available because there's not a mechanism to store it. I just think that we need to thoughtfully look at policy instead of looking at politics to say that we are the leader in renewables and things like that. I think we really need to thoughtfully look at policy and make sure that we're doing the right thing for our state, and I ask for a no vote.
Mr. Rendon, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 645 would simply increase the state's RPS from 33% to 50% by 2030. This is a winner in terms of jobs production. It's a winner in terms of environmental protection. I ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Rendon. Mr. Jones, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It's on this RPS thing that we've been working on for quite a while. A lot of my constituents in my district are really shocked and surprised when they find out that large hydro is not counted in the RPS. And the question they have on that is, how can you get more renewable than large hydro? That's the most renewable resource you can have. It runs 24 hours a day. As long as there's rain or snow, it drives the turbines and makes electricity on a very consistent baseline basis. So, Mr. Speaker, if I may, I have a question for the author, please.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, there's been several bills in the 4 years that you and I have been serving here, and when I was on Budget Sub 3, Transportation and Resources, a lot of these things came up, and CARB came and testified a couple of times. Can you explain for the body and the voters of California, why is large hydro not counted in the RPS?
Well, as you know, I was not here, and neither were you when that original statute was passed. So there are various arguments about whether to procure and include it or not. At the very end, it has not been included yet. partially because we want all the service areas to make progress. Frankly, if you included hydro, one utility would have to do no more, while the other ones would have to do much more. And so that's sort of the question of whether you would want to make the headway that unequal from the perspective of making all the other utilities except for one do more work and that one utility do none.
On my own time, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that answer, and I think that's a partial answer to the question. The rest of the answer is that the majority party and the proponents of these type of bills that are being passed through the House and the Senate, signed by the governor, and placing these extra expenses and restraints on electrical generation on the public, is that the majority party and the proponents of these ideas are bending to the pressure from the environmental organizations that really, stated by their own leaders, are against hydroelectricity. They're against building reservoirs. They're against protecting the public against drought, against flood. They're against businesses in California making progress and earning a fair profit and remaining in business in California. And this whole RPS is an assault on our businesses and trying to drive them out of the state.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Santiago, state
Is it not the tradition of this House for the speakers to speak on the merit of the bill as opposed to unrelated and broad issues?
Is that a point of order, Mr. Santiago? Is that a point of order, Mr. Santiago? That's a point well taken, Mr. Santiago. Mr. Jones, please confine your comments specifically to this bill in front of us today.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, I'm speaking specifically to the RPS and the issues of the bill. So I'm going to appeal the ruling of the chair and ask for a different ruling on that point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is appealing the decision of the chair that point of order was well taken with regard to dealing with the merits of the bill.
Is there a second to the motion?
Is there a second to that motion? There is a second on the floor.
Let's call the member's name. We identify them.
Mr. Mays. Mr. Mays seconded the motion by Mr. Jones, appealing the decision of the chair. Mr. Jones, you have 2 minutes to present the matter as to why you are objecting to the ruling of the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as we get into the more heated debates on this floor, I do recognize that there is a proper time for members on this floor to stand up and ask for a point of order and make sure that the speakers are speaking to the merits of the bill. Mr. Speaker, the reason for my appeal of the decision was I was speaking specifically to the RPS and the effects that the RPS is having on businesses in California, on the public, on taxpayers, on ratepayers. And I believe that this body has kind of lost its collective mind when it comes to how we're going to institute and apply AB 32 moving forward. One of the speakers previous in the day mentioned about how much green jobs are being created in the state of California because of the RPS and AB 32 and all of that. Well, the reason those green jobs are being created is because the state government is throwing billions of dollars at these industries and at the same time not allowing for large hydro to be a part of the RPS. We're not allowing and we're not encouraging large hydro to become more efficient. We're not allowing and we're not encouraging more large hydro to be built. So I don't know, Mr. Speaker, how much more to the point of the bill I could be speaking, and that is the reason for my appeal of the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. As I indicated previously, I ruled in favor of the point of order, that the point of order was well taken, that your comments were expanding outside the immediate content of the bill before us. That is why I made that determination. The question before the body is, shall the decision of the chair be overruled? Mr. Jones is asking for an aye vote. Mr. Holden is asking for a no vote. Members, this is procedural. Majority of those present voting. Clerk will open the roll. Mr. Holden is asking for a no vote. Mr. Jones is asking for an aye vote. Mr. Holden is asking for a no vote. On the appeal of the decision of the chair, Mr. Jones is asking for an aye vote. Clerk will close the roll. Ayes 21, noes 48. That appeal fails.
The chair is sustained.
The chair's ruling is sustained.